We've got another clip of Ami Kozak, Candace Owens, and the prime retard himself, Dave Smith, all discussing Israel. I'm excited to see this clip. I've never seen it before. I'm Tal the Traveling Clad, your favorite Zionist prince. Let's get right into it.
Do you believe that the response to the October 7th attacks has been equal, overboard, and also what would you say is an equal and overboard response?
Well, first of all, Dave, I'll just say, I know you wanted to debate Douglas Murray, but here you have him. It's the next best thing, okay? Everything Dave said is utter nonsense from the get-go. People of your ilk. But anyway, you know, this is what happens when you get two comedians on to talk serious. Well, yes, for you, maybe. Anyway, I'm a huge Douglas Murray fan, and I think he did an awesome job. But for the record, I'll just say this. A couple of things just to what Dave said, and then I'll address your question, Candace, because I think, Dave, would you concede that this, you know, you don't like the word war, I don't like the word conflict, because I think there's a fundamental flaw in presuming that Israel and its enemies are, and I'm using this word carefully, moral equals in the sense in terms of the values that Israel tries to uphold, the state it tries to create, which confuses me about your position in the sense that you're someone who's always fighting for individual rights and sovereignty, and that these governments, the whole purpose of government in and of itself is to protect those rights to the best of its ability. That's what its primary function is, and to the extent, to the degree to which Israel does that better than any other area in the region, I would think that at least morally, sympathetically, your solidarity, or whatever you want to call it, your advocacy, your opinion on this would lie more so with what Israel has to go through, because it's fighting regimes that do not share any of those values at all. Any of our values that are here today in terms of tolerance, individual rights, these kinds of things that Israel, although it's imperfect, is a Western democracy. So it always shocks me when I see people who are principled in your position not see that or side with that. And I know you haven't fully condemned Israel fully, but like, and I've seen other interviews where you do defend what Israel's, you know, the virtues of Israel. But at the same time, I always find that very surprising, because the values that you uphold and say are fighting for on behalf of the Palestinians, it doesn't seem to me that their regimes that represent them, and a lot of people in those populations, don't uphold those values themselves or those desires themselves. So seeing it through a Western American lens, you know, there's a hierarchy of values here, and it seems that the real motivating factor in this war is it's not a geographical or political dispute or a conflict that presumes two sides are fighting as moral equals, but rather an ideological one in which Israel is fighting regimes that are genocidal, that wish to see its destruction because it's a Jewish state, because of not just it as a Jewish state, but Jews worldwide. And they've been very explicit about that. So it confuses me that we impose this idea that everybody just wants the same thing, and we have to just work this out, you know, as a geographical dispute with all of that messy history. What's always seemed to me been animating this before any occupation of any territory even existed was a deep-seated hatred for Jews, the Jewish people, and the Jewish state. So even if people critical of Israel aren't anti-Jewish, the people Israel's directly fighting certainly are.
Okay, that is interesting. So I only want to say that because I did have, and I'm interjecting here, I did have a conversation with someone whose parents were forced out in, I want to say 1945. Is that the correct year?
48, yeah.
And it definitely, I don't think every person that has an issue with Israel is being guided necessarily by this idea that it's just Jewish people. I mean, some of these people were actually living there and had accepted Jewish refugees into their home. One Palestinian is coming to mind, Mohammed Hadid, who they were allowing these refugees to live there for 2 years. They went out one day, came back, and the locks were changed. And they said, and this is, again, I'm telling you what Mohammed Hadid told me, you're not allowed to come back here. Your home is being taken over. If you come back, they will shoot you and kill you. So I think some people are being motivated by what they perceive to be the historical injustice. Do you think that that's a fair assessment to say that some people aren't just looking at this as these are the Jews, or looking at this as these are people who took our homeland and it's not fair? Or do you think that it's changed over the years?
I think what's always fundamentally, not like there are marginal issues and there are fundamental issues, and I'm not denying that innocent Palestinians suffered as a result of all this. And I think, you know, you could play a suffering Olympics all day long and keep going back and keep playing this game all day over who, you know, atrocities that have been committed across the board throughout history. That's not unique to the foundations and formings of any state. But I think that as far as what's fundamental here is not that there's this thirst and desire to create a Palestinian state, but rather to destroy the Jewish one.
Dave?
Okay, let me address a bunch of that stuff. So I think, look, when you say okay, so like I'm a libertarian and I believe in freedom and government should, if it exists at all, only be there to protect property.
Can we just start with how annoying this man's voice is? He's so fucking annoying to listen to. I genuinely feel like my brain cells, they just start shrinking when I hear him talk. My God, it's frustrating.
And natural rights. So look, if you were to say, like, let's compare the United States of America to Saddam Hussein's Iraq, which society would I rather live in? Which society do I think is more moral? Which government, was less oppressive? Okay, obviously the answer is the United States of America, or at least to its own people. We're probably a lot more oppressive to other countries, but that's totally irrelevant to whether I'd have solidarity with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. The question is, who's right in this conflict? Were you justified in invading and destroying and killing 1 million people there? And the answer is no. And so it doesn't matter. Like, that, it's just totally irrelevant to the conflict. Now, it's not irrelevant to how you feel about the country as a whole. But if you're talking about the war in Iraq, I'm not going to go like, well, George W. Bush is not as brutal as Saddam Hussein, therefore I have some solidarity with him. It's like, no, he's destroying a nation of people. He has no right to do this. And by the way, he's also greatly degrading my country. Now, as far as the rest of your characterization of Israel, I think it's totally unfair and not in line with the history. And it's kind of circular reasoning. Like, you're like, well, but don't you... Israel's the good guy, so how come you don't support the good guy? Wouldn't you be more sympathetic to them because they're the good guy? It's like, well, no, but look, Israel is not a Western democracy. They're just not. And they don't get to play this card anymore. Israel took control of the West Bank and Gaza in 1967. They haven't occupied them for a few months after a war or even a few years after the war. They've occupied them for nearly 60 years, for longer than the Soviet Union occupied all of Eastern Europe. And none of the people in those territories have any voting rights whatsoever. So how can you call yourself a democracy? By the way, I'm not that into democracy.
I understand.
I don't really care about voting rights. My beef is that they have no natural rights whatsoever. But you don't get to just hold 5 million people captive for nearly 60 years with no voting rights and claim to be a democracy. That's an apartheid regime. Okay. And so I don't, listen, the fact is, and many, just to your other point, because there were a few there. Sure. Many Israelis at the highest level of government have admitted this for many, many years, from Moshe Dayan to Barak, all up and down. Bunch of former prime ministers who admitted. It was Ehud Barak who said, if I was a young Palestinian, I'd be a terrorist too. And it's not because they are just all possessed by evil and Jew hatred. The truth is that the creation of Israel, however you feel about it, involved 750,000 Palestinians being kicked off of their land. And then after 1967, they've been occupied by a foreign military ever since. It is the most human thing in the world that you would develop hatred for the people who did that to you. There is no group of people anywhere, including the three of us, who would not develop a burning hatred for the foreign military that is policing your streets, kidnapping your people whenever they feel like it, killing your people with zero consequences. I mean, imagine this government. Look, the Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, which is he is the longest serving prime minister in the history of Israel, was founded by who? Menachem Begin, a literal terrorist. That's what Israel did with their terrorists. They elected them prime minister. Who wouldn't? How could you possibly live in Gaza or the West Bank and not hate Israel?
Okay. Can I respond?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So there's a lot there. I mean, I appreciate we're letting each other go for a little while because I appreciate your perspective. But you mentioned the word invasion. And if we bring it to here and now and we talk about what happened on October 7th, because we are talking about this current military campaign, just to kind of hone in on specific points in history for a minute, because we can deliberate all of the history that you mentioned and alluded to, and it can take up 3 hours. But if we're just talking about here and now, right now, and trying to solve these problems, On October 7th, who invaded who? And did they invade occupied territory, or did they invade sovereign kibbutzim of individuals and deliberately target their civilians because they were Jews? Let's remember, the terrorists that called his parents on October 7th, and they have an audio recording of it, saying, Mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy. He didn't say, I got our house back. I got our property back. Guess what? I liberated Palestine. He said, Mom, Dad, I killed 10 Jews with my bare hands. And they scream in pride and elation. They took Israeli babies that are still being held hostage today. The reason they're doing it because they're animated by Jew hatred. And I think to be naive to that is incredibly dangerous. And it misses the entire motivation behind what Israel's facing. This occupation of these places that you mentioned. First of all, Israel leaving Gaza in 2005, 2006, leaving it to every effort, in other words, for Israel to give land back and minimize what you call the occupation, which I think is a false term, and we can talk about that, because occupation refers to one sovereign nation illegally occupying an existing sovereign nation, of which there was no such thing when it came to Palestine. I know the geography was called Palestine, and I say that just as a point of preference to say that a lot of the language in this conversation is deceptive. It's not just a propagandistic talking point, but I think saying terms like that gives people this false narrative impression that a sovereign state of Palestine that was independent and had its own leadership and its own independence was usurped by Israel in what you alluded to today, leaving out what actually happened in the formation of Israel, in that the refugee crisis was largely caused by the fact that a lot of the Arab nations did not want the creation of a Jewish state and sought to destroy it upon its formation. And so we can't just start the story in the middle. So fundamentally, you can say it's the occupation that's leading to all this terrorism. And I know you're not excusing the actions of the terrorists, as some people have tried to throw your way. I'm not saying you're saying that, but you're saying that there's a context here. And I would say, yeah, it didn't start on October 7th, but it didn't start in 67 or 48 either. There were massacres of Jews in the 20s in Hebron. There were massacres and tensions between these two people and hatred going on in the Islamic world going back to the beginning. If you go to protests today and you hear chants in Arabic, they're not saying two states side by side, liberation for the West Bank for a free state of Palestine alongside Israel. They're saying Khaybar, Khaybar, Yar Yahud. And what is that reference to? Khaybar, Khaybar, Yar Yahud? The Battle of Khaybar, in which Muhammad came across the Jews and he gave them a choice: convert to Islam or submit and become dhimmis and second-class citizens. And this is what's animated the entire region and the expulsion of Jews throughout all of the Arab countries in the Arab world. And so the need for a sense of Jewish safety in the region, I think, is super important and not to be discounted. And my fundamental point is that I do not think it's occupation that leads to terrorism. It's terrorism that leads to occupation. In other words, the only reason these things perpetuate is because Israel is continually attacked. And if you want the solution to stop, you have to have goodwill on the Palestinian side to commit to not wanting to kill the Jews in Israel and attack them. And I think leaving Gaza in 2005 was a perfect example of that. What did happen? I know you've heard these points before, Dave, that greenhouses and infrastructure were left there. Hamas takes over, kills their political opponents, fellow Muslims, Fatah, and establishes a terrorist statelet using all the international aid and funding to fire rockets and attack at Israel, invade Israel on October 7th, breaking a ceasefire. So accountability, I'm not denying suffering of what you're talking about for local populations, but who's accountable for that? And at a certain point, you can't say Israel is.
Dave Smith is also retarded, so I think these points of Ami are just going by the wayside. Couple things to mention too. Gaza was supposed to be given back to Egypt, and Egypt said, "Fuck no, we don't want those psychopaths." My grandparents, my mother and father used to shop in Gaza in the shuk. They used to go there to buy vegetables and food. My own family. I remember when I was a kid. I remember when they gave Gaza back. I remember the whole process. I remember seeing it firsthand. What was going on, televised to the world. You saw our Israeli citizens being evicted out of their homes for what? For what? Egypt didn't want to take Gaza back. Why didn't they not want to take it? Because they said it's full of terrorism. And Egypt's kind of a terrorist-filled country anyways. So imagine terrorists saying, we don't want those terrorists. This is before Palestinian identity was really even a thing. And Egypt, that country that's so backwards, recognized it was a fucked up place we don't want to bring into our entire territory. Dave Smith, he gets on a pedestal, he gets on a stage and pretend he ignores everything before 1948. Everything before 1948. And then I love these pro-Palestinian talking points. They're like, well, we can't go too far back. It has to start in 1948. I'm like, why does it have to start in 1948? Why do you start it at 1948? Why? For when Arabs were massacring Jews all across the Middle East, in the context, before proper states were built, before proper borders were built, before proper governments were happening, throughout the entire Ottoman Empire, through the entire British occupation, when the Arabs conquered. How far do we need to go back for you to understand that Arabs, Muslims have been abusing Jewish populations, treating us as dhimmis for 1,000 years? Everything you see today, including the Gaza conflict, is a perpetuation of that. That issue was never solved. Arabs, Muslims, the Ottomans, the Arab empires, whatever you want it to be, never stopped murdering Jewish people. They never stopped abusing Jewish people. Yes, there were periods of time where stuff was good, but there were also periods of time where they just murdered 50,000. They beheaded people just cause. And Ami even misspoke a little bit, because the Battle of Khaybar, it wasn't just becoming dhimmis. When Muhammad took his 10th wife, Safiya, who was a Jew from the Benu Nadir, Benu Quraysh Jewish tribes of the Arabian Peninsula, he murdered her entire family in front of her eyes, beheading her brother and her father in front of her, and then forcing her to become his wife. And this isn't me digging on Muhammad, and this isn't me digging on Islam, but if you need context, there's your context for why Muslims chant Khaybar ya Yahud in 2025 on the streets of America, in the streets of the West. Dave Smith is a fucking idiot. Anybody who keeps platforming, I'm sorry, by virtue, Candace Owens is a bigger fucking idiot. Anybody who platforms these fools is insane. It's absolutely crazy. And you know what? It really pisses me off that there hasn't been any Mizrahi Jews, really, maybe besides Gad Saad, who sort of sassily replies to Dave Smith. There has been no attempt at platforming a Mizrahi Jew in front of these people. And I'm not discounting what Ami Kozak is doing, because he's great. And he's really well spoken. But Dave needs to fucking hear it from the source. It doesn't have to be me, but he needs to hear it from the fucking source. So does Candace, by the way. But I genuinely, I sit here and I wonder, why the fuck are we being ignored? Why are Mizrahi Jews not being platformed at all? At all. I saw one interview with Piers Morgan with Chen Mazik the other day. But let's be fair, and this isn't a dig at Chen Mazik, but he's not like the most, not going to say well-versed, but he doesn't really push the Mizrahi Jewish talking points very much. And the problem is the Mizrahi Jewish talking points, they combat everything these people say. Everything. We're a complete walking, breathing contradiction. It's insane, bro. Everybody in my family, my entire family was ethnically cleansed by Muslims. I didn't serve in the IDF. I'm a descendant of refugees. And there's so many people like me. Don't bring me on. Bring on an Ethiopian Jew. Bring on a Somalian Jew, a Sudanese Jew, a Djiboutin Jew, an Eritrean Jew. There's so many. Why are we not being platformed? You have to ask yourself this question. Pisses me off. I'll see you guys next one. I love you a long time. Goodbye, class. If you believe in my content and want to support me, just know your help is needed. There's a bunch of great ways to support me, being PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, or joining my Patreon community down below. Patreon is the best way to support my channel, and you'll get a bunch of cool perks depending on what tier you join. Another great way to support me is by buying my merchandise on thetravelingclat.com. I regularly drop new merch designs like this beautiful hat or this amazing shirt, where you can support the channel and get something cool for yourself. I also have an amazing Discord community with people from all over the world. Thank you so much for your support.